started before my brain did. Deep, metallic knocks that didn't sound like a neighbor and didn't sound like a delivery. It sounded like authority. Like someone had decided I didn't get to sleep in my own house anymore. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart already sprinting. For a second I didn't know what day it was. Then I saw the faint gray light leaking through the blinds and the clock on my nightstand. Just after 6 a.m. my throat felt thick like I'd swallowed cotton. I pulled on a sweatshirt and stepped into the hallway, careful with my footsteps out of habit. Like the house might wake up and scold me for existing. The pounding came again, followed by a male voice. "Sheriff's office, open the door." My hands went cold instantly. I didn't rush, I didn't hesitate. And I moved the way you move when you've learned that panic makes you sloppy, and sloppy becomes a story other people tell about you later. I flipped the porch light on and looked through the peephole. A deputy sheriff stood on my front step in a tan uniform with a black vest, one hand holding a clipboard of papers. Behind him, his patrol car sat at the curb with its lights off, like he'd decided not to wake the whole street. Then I saw them. Across the street, half in shadow, my parents stood near the neighbor's mailbox like spectators at a parade. My mother's arms were folded. My father's hands were in his coat pockets. They weren't surprised to see a deputy on my porch. They were satisfied. I opened the door with the chain still on. "Ma'am," the deputy said, calm but firm. "Are you Tessa Ward?" "Yes," I replied. He glanced down at the papers. "I'm Deputy Romero with the County Sheriff's Office. I'm here regarding a writ of possession. It's an eviction order." The word eviction hit my chest like a shove. "This is my house," I said. My voice didn't shake because I didn't allow it. "There has to be a mistake." Deputy Romero didn't react. He'd heard that sentence 100 times and probably hated what came after it every single time. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm not here to debate ownership. I'm here to execute a court order." I stared at the page in his hand. My name was printed on it, in clean black letters like I was a tenant who'd missed rent. Not the person who paid the taxes, replaced the roof shingles, and planted the tree out back with my grandfather when I was a teenager. My mother called from across the street loud enough to carry. "You should have done what family asked," my father added, voice flat like a verdict. "Pack. This is happening today." Deputy Romero's eyes flicked toward them, then back to me. He lowered his voice a fraction. "Do you have somewhere you can go?" he asked. The question wasn't kind. It was procedural. But it still made my stomach twist. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not until you show me what this is." He lifted the top page slightly and angled it so I could read without stepping outside. There it was in bold. Writ of possession. A case number underneath. A court seal. A judge's signature I didn't recognize. My pulse tried to climb. I held it down. I didn't scream. I didn't try. I didn't ask my parents why because I already knew the answer. They didn't need a reason that made sense. They only needed a reason that sounded acceptable to strangers. I pointed to the line near the top. "Who filed this?" Deputy Romero's gaze followed my finger. He hesitated just long enough to tell me the answer mattered. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the plaintiff on this case is..." He stopped mid-sentence. Looked back at the paperwork. Then looked at me again, and his face changed. Not shock, not pity, recognition. Like someone had just realized the villain was standing in plain sight. He cleared his throat once and said, "It was filed by Diane Ward and Mark Ward." My parents didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. My mother's chin lifted like she was proud of the line being read out loud. I felt something go still inside me. A clean, cold stillness. Because if the plaintiff was my parents, that meant they hadn't just threatened me. Yeah, they'd gone into a courthouse and turned themselves into the story's reasonable side. And if there was a writ, it meant they'd already gotten a judgment. Without me. I kept my voice level. "When was this case filed?" Deputy Romero checked the page. "Judgment was entered last week." Last week. My mouth went dry. I'd been here last week. I'd gone to work, come home, watered the plants, Slept in this bed. I hadn't been in court. I hadn't been served anything. No deputy at my door, no certified mail, no taped notice on my window. Where was I served? I asked. Deputy Romero looked down again, and this time his pause was heavier. He ran his thumb down a section, scanning. Service address listed as 128 Maple Terrace. I didn't answer because my brain was already refusing the reality. Maple Terrace was not my address, and it wasn't any address I'd had in my adult life. It was the little rental my parents had lived in 15 years ago before they moved up. The place with a cracked driveway and the mailbox that leaned like a tired tooth. A place I hadn't set foot in since high school. That's not my address, I said calmly. That's not where I live. Deputy Romero's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't say I know, he said, it's what's on the return of service. My mother called out again, sweeter now, like she was performing for the deputy. Oh, we tried to do this the easy way, Tessa. You forced us. I didn't look at her. I looked at Deputy Romero. Can you show me the return of service? I asked. He flipped a page back, careful. Ma'am, I can show you what I have. He angled it so I could read. A line stating service had been completed. A signature, sign, a date, a time, and a description that made my skin go cold. Substitute service accepted by adult female occupant at Maple Terrace. Adult female occupant, Maple Terrace. My parents had used an address they controlled and claimed someone accepted papers on my behalf. I slowly looked across the street. My mother stared back at me with a calm, practiced face, like she'd already rehearsed how this day would go. And in that moment, I understood the real purpose of the eviction. It wasn't just to humiliate me, it was to rush me, force me to pack, leave, lose control of the house, make me too scattered to fight in time. Because if I didn't get a judge to stop this, a deputy sheriff would legally remove me from the home my grandfather left me. I swallowed once, keeping my voice low. This house was my grandfather's, I said to Deputy Romero. He left it to me. Deputy Romero didn't argue. He simply held the papers tighter, like he hated being the delivery system for other people's cruelty. Ma'am, he said, if you believe the court order was obtained improperly, you need to contact the court immediately and file an emergency motion. I can't tell you how to do that. I nodded once. I understand. He glanced back down, then up, and his voice turned even more careful. There's one more thing, he said. This writ authorizes same-day possession. My stomach tightened. Same day? He looked me straight in the eye, professional and not unkind. Without a judge's stay? He said. I have to clear this house by noon. I didn't stand there arguing with the deputy at my door. Arguing would have given my parents what they wanted, a scene, a story, and a reason to point and say I was unsteady. So I did the only thing that mattered. I built a record. I asked Deputy Romero to hold the paperwork steady while I took clear photos of every page. The case number, the court seal, the signature line, the service address, the return of service language. Then I stepped back inside, shut the door gently and slid the deadbolt into place like it could buy me time. It couldn't. But documentation could. Through the window I could still see my parents across the street, watching like they were waiting for me to start throwing boxes onto the lawn. My mother had that same satisfied stillness she used to wear when she thought she'd cornered me into obedience. I didn't give her the satisfaction of movement. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, my phone, and one small fireproof pouch from the drawer where I kept the boring things that become life or death when other people decide to get creative. My deed copy, my grandfather's probate distribution letter, the property tax statements, and the homeowner's policy in my name. Then I called the courthouse clerk's office while I was still standing in my own kitchen. The line rang twice. Civil Division? A woman answered, voice brisk. I have a writ of possession for an eviction, I said calmly. I was never served. I need to know how to request an emergency stay and set aside a default. There was a pause. Keys clicking. The kind of pause that meant she'd pulled the case number, and was deciding how much mercy the system was willing to offer at 6 in the morning. "What's the case number?" she asked. I read it off the page. She typed it in. Longer this time. Then her voice changed, just slightly less scripted. "Ma'am," she said. "This is an unlawful detainer filed by Mark and Diane Ward. Default judgment entered last week." "I was never served," I repeated. "The service address listed is Maple Terrace. That's not my address." Another pause. More keys. "I see the return," she said carefully. "It says substitute service accepted by an adult female occupant." "That would be my mother," I said. And my voice stayed even because if I let myself feel the rage, I'd lose time. "What do I do right now?" "You need to file an emergency motion to stay enforcement," she said, "and a motion to vacate the default." "How fast can that be heard?" I asked. She hesitated. "Depends on the judge's calendar." "It has to be heard today," I said. "Not the deputy says he has to clear the house by noon." The clerk exhaled quietly like she didn't like what she was about to say, but she was going to say it anyway. "Come to the courthouse as soon as we open," she said. "Bring identification and proof of your address. Bring any evidence you were not served. And if you have proof you own the property, bring that too." "I do," I said. "Okay," she replied. "And ma'am, don't delay. If the writ is executed, it becomes harder." Harder meant the kind of harder that destroys people financially and then calls it procedure. I ended the call, grabbed the pouch and walked back to my front door. Deputy Romero was still on my porch, waiting with the patience of a man who didn't enjoy his job. My parents were still across the street, unmoving. I opened the door again with the chain on. "I'm going to the courthouse," I told the deputy. "I'm filing an emergency stay." He nodded once. "That's what you need to do." My mother called out sweet as poison. "You can file whatever you want. It's already done." Deputy Romero's jaw tightened at her tone, but he didn't respond. He just looked at me. "Ma'am," he said, lower. "I'm not allowed to give legal advice, but I can tell you this. If you get assigned a stay order, you call our civil unit immediately. They'll instruct me not to execute." "I understand," I said. "Can you give me the civil unit number?" He hesitated, then wrote it on the corner of a card and slid it toward the crack in the door. My father finally spoke again, louder this time. "Pack your things. Don't make this ugly." I met his gaze across the street and kept my voice quiet. "You made it ugly when you lied to a judge," I said. My mother's face tightened, but she smiled anyway, like she thought my words didn't matter anymore. I closed the door without giving them another line. Then I left through the back door, walked around the fence and got into my car without having to pass them like they owned the sidewalk. On the drive to the courthouse, the sky brightened into that pale morning color that makes everything look harmless. My hands were steady on the wheel. My mind wasn't. I kept thinking about Maple Terrace, about my parents signing for papers meant for me, and then pretending the court had served me. About how easily a lie becomes a judgment when you don't know you're supposed to show up. When the courthouse doors opened, I was already there. The building smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. The security guard at the metal detector looked half asleep until I set the writ paperwork on the tray and said, "I have an eviction being executed today." His eyes sharpened. He waved me through faster than anyone else in line. Upstairs, the civil division counter had a thin queue of people holding folders the way drowning people hold air. I waited my turn without fidgeting, because every movement felt like it could be interpreted. When I reached the window, I slid my ID and the writ photos forward. "I need an emergency stay and a motion to vacate," I said. "I was never served. The service address is wrong." The clerk, a man with tired eyes and a badge clipped to his collar, typed my case number and frowned almost immediately. "You're at this address?" he asked, reading from the file. "No," I said. "That address is my parents' old place. I've never lived there as an adult." He clicked again, pulled up a scanned document, and turned his monitor slightly so I could see. A proof of service form with a signature line and a description of the adult female occupant who allegedly accepted papers. My stomach tightened. The signature was a scribble, but the handwriting on the printed name underneath was neat. Diane Ward. My mother hadn't even bothered to hide it. She signed for it, I said quietly. The clerk's eyebrows rose a fraction. She is the plaintiff. Yes, I replied. And she accepted service on my behalf at an address I don't live at. He stared at the screen for a beat longer than he needed to, and then he did something that told me he wasn't just going through motions. He printed the service form and slid it onto the blouse. Highlight that, he said low. It matters. I took the paper with hands that stayed steady because I refused to let the system label me emotional. I also own the house, I said, and I slid out the deed copy from my fireproof pouch along with the probate distribution letter. My grandfather's name at the top? My name listed as the recipient of the property. The clerk looked at the deed and blinked. Then he typed again, faster. Your parents filed this as landlords, he said, voice tightening. They're claiming you're a tenant holding over. A tenant, I repeated, keeping my tone flat. He clicked to another scanned exhibit and turned the monitor again. A one-page rental agreement. My name typed at the top. My parents' names typed under landlord. A signature at the bottom that was supposed to be mine. It wasn't. One, it looked like someone had tried to copy my handwriting from an old birthday card and got bored halfway through. They forged it, I said. The clerk didn't say yes. Clerks don't say yes. He said, if you want the judge to see this today, you need to file your emergency motion now. I can give you the forms and a hearing request slip. He handed me a packet through the slot. Thick, stapled, still warm from the printer. The words emergency motion to stay sat at the top like a life preserver. What judge? I asked. He checked the docket. Judge Halprin is assigned. Can I get in front of her this morning? I said. He hesitated, then glanced over his shoulder toward an interior door that said, Judicial Assistant. I can try, he said. But you need to understand. I understand. I cut in gently. If I don't get a stay, a deputy clears my house by noon. The clerk nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and took my packet back for a stamp. The stamp came down hard. Thunk, ink, bleeding into paper. A sound that made it real. He slid the stamped motion back to me. Go to Department 14, he said. Ask the assistant for an emergency slot. I turned to leave, but he added quieter. Ms. Ward. I looked back. He nodded toward the deed in my hand. If that deed is recorded in your name, your parents' eviction case is a standing problem. Judges don't like standing problems. I didn't thank him like he'd done me a favor. I thanked him like he'd handed me a weapon I knew how to use. In the hallway outside Department 14, I sat on a wooden bench and filled out the motion with slow, clean handwriting. Not rushed, not shaky. Every line deliberate. And when I reached the section that asked for supporting evidence, I listed exactly what the record already showed. Wrong address. Plaintiff signed service. Forged lease. Recorded deed in my name. Then I stood and walked to the assistant's window and slid my packet under the glass. The assistant read the first page, then the second. Then her eyes stopped on the proof of service. Her face changed. Not dramatic. Just alert. She looked up at me. You're saying the plaintiff accepted service on behalf of the defendant? Yes, I said. She stared at me for a long second, then stood up without another word and disappeared through the door behind her. I waited, hands folded, breathing steady, listening to muffled voices inside the judge's chambers. When the door opened again, the assistant returned holding my packet like it was suddenly heavier. She leaned toward the window and spoke quietly. Judge Halprin will see you, she said. But I need to warn you, your parents attached one more document to their filing. And if it's what it looks like, this isn't just an eviction. My stomach tightened. What document? The assistant swallowed once. A deed, she said. A recorded deed that claims the house was transferred back to them. My body went cold, but my face stayed still. A deed, I repeated quietly. Transferred back to them. The assistant nodded once, eyes cautious. It's in the court file as an exhibit. You'll see it when you're in front of the judge. I didn't argue in the hallway. I didn't demand to see it through the glass like a frantic person. I simply nodded and said, yes, thank you. Then I followed her through the door into Department 14. The courtroom was smaller than the lobby below, dimmer, quieter, built for decisions that ruin people politely. A few attorneys sat scattered in the benches with laptops open. A man in a wrinkled suit stared at his hands like he was waiting to be punished. And then I saw my parents. They were seated near the front with a lawyer beside them. A man with silver hair and a calm posture, the kind of attorney people hire when they want the court to assume they're the reasonable ones. My mother wore a soft cardigan and a concerned expression like she'd come to rescue me from myself. My father stared straight ahead, jaw set. They didn't look nervous. They looked prepared. When my mother spotted me, she gave a small, sad smile like she was about to perform compassion. And I didn't return it. The bailiff called the case number and we approached the tables. Judge Halpern took the bench and immediately looked down at the file with a frown that told me she'd already seen some things she didn't like. Good morning, she said. We have an emergency motion to stay enforcement of a writ of possession. Ms. Ward, you're the defendant? Yes, Your Honor, I replied. And you're appearing without counsel today? Yes. Her gaze flicked briefly to my parents' attorney. Counsel? Lawrence Pike for the plaintiffs, Your Honor. Judge Halpern nodded, then looked back at me. Ms. Ward, you understand that writ authorizes possession today? Yes, I said. The deputy said noon. Judge Halpern didn't react to the emotion of that. She reacted to the procedure. And tell me why I should issue an emergency stay. I slid my packet forward, hands steady. Because I was never properly served. The proof of service shows the plaintiff accepted substitute service at an address I do not live at. The address is not mine. And the plaintiff signed the service form. Judge Halpern's eyes narrowed slightly. Plaintiff signed the service form. Yes, I said. Mr. Pike smiled faintly like he was about to explain a way of technicality. Judge Halpern looked at him. Counsel, is that accurate? Mr. Pike stood, voice smooth. Your Honor, service was completed according to statute. Substitute service is permitted. The occupant accepted. Judge Halpern lifted a hand. Don't recite statute at me, answer the question. Did your client sign as the adult female occupant who accepted substitute service? Mr. Pike hesitated. I then chose his words carefully. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Ward accepted service at the address listed in the complaint as Ms. Ward's last known address. Judge Halpern's gaze snapped back to me. Is Maple Terrace your last known address? No, I said. I have not lived there as an adult. My driver's license, tax bills, and utility bills reflect my current address. I slid my ID and a recent utility bill forward. Judge Halpern scanned them quickly. Then she looked at my mother. Mrs. Ward, she said. Why did you accept service on behalf of the defendant at an address that is not her residence? My mother's lips trembled into a practiced sorrow. Your Honor, she began softly. We've tried everything. She's been unstable. She stopped answering us. We didn't know what else to do. There it was again. Unstable. And a label meant to make the court stop asking uncomfortable questions. Judge Halpern didn't even blink. That's not an answer, she said. You either knew where she lived or you didn't. My father leaned forward slightly, voice low. We were just trying to protect the property. Judge Halpern's eyes stayed sharp. Protect it from whom? My father didn't answer. My mother lowered her gaze like a saint. Mr. Pike stepped in fast. Your Honor, the plaintiffs own the home. They had to recover possession. The defendant has been refusing to leave. Judge Halprin's gaze turned to him. I've reviewed the exhibits, she said, and her tone tightened. One of them is a deed. My throat tightened. Judge Halprin lifted a single page from the file and held it up. Exhibit C is a recorded quitclaim deed purporting to transfer the property from Tessa Ward to Mark and Diane Ward, she said. Recorded 2 weeks ago. My mother inhaled softly like she was about to cry. My father's face stayed flat. Judge Halprin looked at me. Ms. Ward, did he sign a quitclaim deed transferring this property to your parents 2 weeks ago? No, I said. Mr. Pike's voice came in, smooth. Your Honor, we have a notarized deed on record. Judge Halprin's eyes snapped to him. I didn't ask you. Then she looked at me again. You're saying that deed is fraudulent? Yes, I replied. And I can prove I was not present for any notarization. I was at work that day, and my employer has access logs. Judge Halprin's pen stopped moving. Access logs, she repeated. Yes, I said calmly. Badge entry and security camera logs. Time stamped. Mr. Pike's expression tightened. Your Honor, this is turning into a title dispute. Probate matters belong in a different department. Judge Halprin's gaze hardened. This is not a probate matter right now. This is an unlawful detainer filed by people claiming to be owners, supported by a deed the defendant says she never signed, combined with a service return signed by the plaintiff and an incorrect address. She paused, then said the sentence that made my parents finally shift in their seats. I am not comfortable with enforcing a writ of possession on this record. Mr. Pike opened his mouth. Judge Halprin cut him off. I will address the stay first, she said. Ms. Ward, do you have proof of current recorded ownership in your name? Yes, I said. I pulled out the recorder's office printout I'd requested that morning from the clerk downstairs. My property record summary, stamped. Judge Halprin took it, scanned, and her eyebrows rose slightly. It shows the property was distributed to you through your grandfather's estate, she said, reading. Recorded last year. Then it shows a quitclaim deed 2 weeks ago transferring it to your parents. She looked at me again. And you're denying you signed that quitclaim? Yes. Judge Halprin leaned back slightly and stared at the deed exhibit. Then she looked at the notary block at the bottom. Her eyes narrowed. Mr. Pike didn't notice fast enough. My parents did. My mother's shoulders went rigid. Judge Halprin tapped the notary commission number with a pen. Counsel, she said. Whose notary is this? Mr. Pike blinked. Your Honor? Whose notary? Judge Halprin repeated, sharper. Mr. Pike glanced down. It appears to be a notary named Carla Mendez. Judge Halprin looked at my father. Mr. Ward? She said. Do you know Carla Mendez? My father's mouth opened, then closed. My mother answered for him, voice thin. She's a friend. Judge Halprin's gaze stayed fixed. A friend who notarized a deed transferring your daughter's inherited home to you 2 weeks ago. Mr. Pike tried again, urgency creeping in. Your Honor, the deed is recorded. It's presumptively valid. Judge Halprin didn't blink. Presumptively valid is not immune. She turned to the bailiff. I'm issuing an emergency stay of the writ of possession, she said. Effective immediately, notify the sheriff's civil unit. My lungs loosened in a quiet, controlled exhale. Judge Halprin continued, voice crisp. This is stayed pending a hearing on the motion to vacate default and a referral for potential fraud regarding the deed. My mother's face tightened. Your Honor? Judge Halprin looked at her. Stop, she said. You don't get to speak now. Then the judge looked at me again. Ms. Ward, she said, I need you to understand something. If this deed is fraudulent, you need more than an eviction stay. You need to protect the title immediately. I know, I said. Judge Halpern nodded. Good. Because I'm ordering that the county recorder be notified of a potential fraudulent conveyance. Mr. Pike's face went pale. And then Judge Halpern added, calm but fine. And I want the notary to appear. In person. With her journal. My parents went still. My mother's eyes widened slightly. My father's jaw tightened so hard a muscle jumped. Because a notary journal isn't a story, it's timestamps, signatures, IDs, thumbprints in some states. It's evidence. Judge Halpern set the file down. Hearing set for tomorrow morning, she said. Ms. Ward, bring your employment access logs. Plaintiffs will bring the notary and the original deed. If anyone fails to appear, there will be consequences. My mother's lips parted, and for the first time the concerned mask looked like what it was. Fear. As the judge stepped down, the bailiff handed Mr. Pike the stay order to distribute. I took my copy and walked out without looking at my parents. In the hallway my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Deputy Romero, I answered immediately. I got the stay, I said. His relief was audible. Copy that, he replied. You text me a photo of the signed order, I'll notify civil and will stand out. I'm sending it now, I said. I snapped a clear photo and sent it. Then, as I turned toward the stairs, I heard my mother's voice behind me. Low, urgent, no longer sweet. You think this ends it? She hissed. You don't understand what you just started. I didn't turn around. Because I did understand. If the deed was fake, this wasn't about an eviction anymore. This was about how far my parents were willing to go to steal a dead man's gift from their own daughter. And tomorrow, with that notary journal on a courtroom table, we were going to find out. I didn't go home alone. Not because I was afraid to be in my own house, but because I was done letting my parents control the environment. After I texted Deputy Romero the stay order photo, I called the sheriff's civil unit number he'd written for me earlier and asked them to confirm they'd received the stay. The dispatcher's voice was short, neutral. Yes, ma'am, we have the stay on file. Enforcement is suspended. Then, I did the next thing quietly without asking anyone's permission. I drove straight to the county recorder's office. It was still early, and the waiting room smelled like paper and stale air conditioning. People sat in plastic chairs holding marriage certificates, lien releases, property tax bills. No drama, just administration. I took a number and waited. When my number was called, I stepped to the counter and slid my ID and the recorder printout forward. My grandfather's estate distribution deed, and the newer quitclaim deed that supposedly transferred the property back to my parents. Now I need to place a fraud alert on my property record, I said. A judge issued a stay today and referred the deed for potential fraud. The clerk behind the counter, mid-30s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp, looked at the deed number and typed. Her expression changed almost immediately. Ma'am? She said. This quitclaim was recorded 2 weeks ago. Yes. And it was submitted in person, she said, eyes scanning the intake notes. With a notary acknowledgement attached. I kept my voice calm. I did not sign it. A judge ordered the notary to appear with her journal tomorrow. The clerk didn't respond with sympathy. She responded with procedure. Do you have the case number? She asked. I gave it to her. She typed it into a notes field and printed a small form. Fill this out. We'll attach a fraud alert flag to the parcel record. And it doesn't invalidate the deed automatically, she added. But it places a public notice that the conveyance is disputed. And it can trigger additional verification if someone tries to record more documents. That was exactly what I needed. I signed the form in my normal signature. Slow, clean, and slid it back. The clerk stamped it and added it to the file. Then she did something that made my stomach tighten again. She clicked into the deed's digital image and zoomed in on the notary block. Can I ask you a question? She said carefully. Yes. She tapped the screen with her pen. Do you know why the notary's commission number looks odd? My throat tightened. Odd how? She rotated the monitor slightly so I could see. The commission number had one digit crossed out and rewritten. A tiny correction. Now almost invisible unless you were trained to notice intake problems. That correction should have triggered a rejection, she said quietly. But it didn't. It went through. I stared at the screen and felt my anger sharpen into focus. A crossed-out digit in a legal acknowledgement isn't a typo. It's an opening. Can you print that image? I asked. She nodded once. Yes, and I'll print the intake metadata too. When she handed me the pages, they were warm and official. Exactly what my parents couldn't argue with later. I left the recorder's office with the fraud alert confirmation in my bag and drove home, my mind running like a clean machine. If the deed was forged, there were only a few ways it could have been recorded: a notary who lied, a signature that wasn't mine, an ID that was fake or stolen. I didn't someone who believed I wouldn't fight because I'd be too shocked to move. When I pulled into my driveway, my house looked normal. Quiet, sun on the siding, porch light off. But my parents' car was parked across the street again. They were still watching. I didn't give them the show they wanted. I walked into my house, locked the door, and went straight to the kitchen table. Then I did what they never expected me to do. I called my employer. Not to complain, not to cry, to request logs. My company's security office answered on the second ring. Security, a man said. This is Tessa Ward, I replied. I need badge access logs for 2 weeks ago, specifically the entire day of the 13th. There was a pause. Why? Because a deed was filed claiming I signed it in front of a notary that day, I said calmly. And I need to document where I was. The tone on the other end shifted instantly. Understood, he said. I'll need an email request and a case number if there's one. I have one, I replied, and I gave it to him. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He said, we'll pull badge entries and parking gate logs. If the cameras still have footage, we'll preserve it. Preserve. That word felt like protection. When I ended the call, I looked out my front window again. My mother was on the sidewalk now, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like she was trying to contain impatience. My father stood with his arms crossed, staring at my house like it owed him an apology. Then my doorbell rang. Once. And when I didn't answer, it rang again. I didn't move toward the door, I moved toward my phone. I opened my camera app and started recording, holding it low, capturing the timestamp and the sound. Then I walked to the door and spoke through it without unlocking anything. Yes. My mother's voice came sharp through the wood. Open the door. No, I replied. My father's voice followed, controlled. We're here to resolve this. Like family. I kept my tone flat. You filed an eviction against me, you forged a lease. You recorded a deed, that's not family, that's fraud. My mother's voice rose. How dare you? I didn't answer that. I asked a question instead. Why did you do it? Silence. Then my father spoke, voice low and cold. Because Grandpa promised the house would stay in the family, he said. And you were making decisions we didn't approve. I felt my jaw tighten. I am the family, I said. My mother snapped, you're ungrateful. Hey, that man would have wanted us to have it. I breathed in slowly. He didn't, I said. That's why the deed is in my name. My father's voice dropped even lower, like he was offering a warning. Tomorrow the notary will say you signed. I didn't flinch. Then tomorrow she'll produce her journal, I said. And it will show what she claims she verified. My mother's voice turned sweet again. Too sweet. You don't want to ruin lives over paperwork, Tessa? That line told me everything. They weren't afraid of losing the house. They were afraid of what the paper trail would reveal about how they tried to take it. I kept my voice quiet. You already chose to ruin this, I said. I'm just making sure it's recorded correctly. Then I ended the conversation the same way I ended every conversation, with people trying to manipulate the moment. I stopped speaking. Outside I heard my mother inhale hard, then exhale with forced calm. Fine, she said through the door. See you in court. Their footsteps moved away. I didn't stop recording until I heard their car door shut. An hour later my email pinged. From my employer's security office. Subject: Badge access logs, Tessa Ward, requested. Date: I opened the attachment. And there it was in black and white. Entry time, exit time, internal door access, parking gate. The log showed me entering the building that morning and not leaving until after 6 p.m. No gap. No time to drive across town, sign a deed, and come back unnoticed. Then another email arrived. This one from the county recorder clerk. On subject: Fraud alert confirmation. Parcel record attached. The official fraud alert placement notice and the printed image showing the corrected notary commission number. I stacked the documents on my table like I was building a wall, because tomorrow wasn't going to be about what my parents claimed. It was going to be about what the notary's journal could survive. And right before I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. One sentence. If you show up tomorrow, you'll lose more than a house. My skin went cold. Not because I was scared, because threats meant they knew what was coming, and they didn't think they could stop it cleanly. I didn't reply to the unknown number. I screenshotted the threat, saved it to a folder labeled with the case number, and forwarded it to myself with the subject line: Threat received night before hearing. Then I did the simplest, most important thing. I went to sleep. Not peacefully, not easily. But I forced my body to rest because exhaustion makes you careless. And my parents had built their entire plan around me being too tired, too shocked, too alone to fight. At 8:45 the next morning, I walked back into Department 14 with a single folder and a calm face. My parents were already there with their attorney. My mother wore a slightly different cardigan, like she believed costume changes reset the narrative. My father looked impatient, jaw set, eyes fixed on the bench like he was waiting for permission to take what he'd decided belonged to him. And sitting behind them, stiff posture, purse clutched tight, was the notary, Carla Mendez. And she looked nothing like I'd expected. Not smug, not confident. Just tense, like she'd been told to show up and repeat a line and she was praying no one asked the wrong question. When the bailiff called the case, Judge Hodgman took the bench with the same focused expression she'd worn yesterday. Only today it looked sharper, less tolerant. Good morning, she said. We are here on the defendant's motion to vacate default and the court's concern regarding a recorded quitclaim deed submitted as an exhibit. She looked directly at my parents' attorney. Counsel, do you have the original deed? Mr. Pike stood. Yes, Your Honor. He held up a manila envelope like it was holy. Judge Hodgman turned her gaze to the notary. Ms. Mendez? She said. You are a commissioned notary public in this state. Yes, Your Honor. Carla answered, voice thin. And you notarized a deed transferring property from Tessa Ward to Mark and Diane Ward on the 13th, the judge said, correct? Carla swallowed. Yes. Judge Halprin's voice stayed calm. Then you will produce your notary journey. Carla hesitated for half a heartbeat. Mr. Pike spoke quickly. Your Honor, the notarization was performed properly. The acknowledgement is complete. The journal is not necessary. Judge Halprin looked at him like he'd suggested she ignore gravity. Sit down, she said. Mr. Pike sat. Judge Halprin kept her eyes on Carla. Journal, now. Carla's hands shook as she opened her purse. She pulled out a small black book, hardcover, worn edges, and held it like it weighed 10 pounds. She walked it up to the clerk, who handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. Judge Halprin flipped it open, and the room went quiet in that way that makes every swallow sound loud. Judge Halprin ran a finger down the entries, then stopped. She looked up. Ms. Mendez? She said evenly. Please tell the court what identification you verified for Tessa Ward on the 13th. Carla blinked fast. Her driver's license. Judge Halpern looked back down. Your journal entry lists a driver's license number ending in 931. My stomach tightened. My license didn't end in 931. Judge Halpern lifted her eyes again. Ms. Ward, she said to me, what are the last 3 digits of your driver's license number? I answered without hesitation. 617. Judge Halpern nodded once. Then she looked at Carla and the calm in her voice became something else. Something dangerous. Your use of the journal does not match the defendant's actual license, she said. Explain. Carla's lips parted and closed again. Her eyes flipped toward my parents just once. So small most people would have missed it. But Judge Halpern didn't miss anything. Mr. Pike stood up too fast. Your Honor, journals can contain clerical errors. Judge Halpern cut him off. Enough. She turned the journal slightly and read the next line into the record. This entry lists the signer is Tessa Ward, she said. And under signature, there is a scribble that does not resemble the signature on the defendant's filings. She turned her gaze to Carla. Did you witness Tessa Ward sign this deed in your presence? Carla's voice came out strained. Yes. Judge Halpern didn't raise her voice. She simply reached for the printout I'd submitted yesterday, my employer's access logs, and held them up. Ms. Ward, she said, you stated you were at work for the entire day. Yes, I replied. Do you have documentation? She asked, showing you were physically present. Yes, I said, and I slid forward the badge logs and the security office certification email. Then I added the one thing people like my father always forget exists. My parking gate log with a time-stamped plate scan. Judge Halpern scanned the first page, then the second. Her eyes narrowed at the timestamps. Then she looked at Carla. Ms. Mendez, she said. At what time did you notarize this deed? Carla swallowed. Around noon. Judge Halpern turned to the log. The defendant's badge log shows her inside a secured building at noon with internal door access, she said. Her parking gate log shows her vehicle inside the controlled garage. She did not leave. Carla's face tightened, and her voice cracked slightly. Maybe it was later. Judge Halpern flipped the journal again. Your journal lists the time as 12:15, she said. So no. Not later. Mr. Pike looked like he wanted to vanish. My mother's hands were clenched so tightly her fingers looked pale. My father stared straight ahead, as if refusing to look at the evidence would stop it from existing. Judge Halpern set the journal down slowly and leaned forward. Ms. Mendez? She said. Are you familiar with the consequences of notarizing a signature you did not witness? Carla's eyes filled with panic. Yes. Then I'm going to ask you one last time, Judge Halpern said. Did you witness Tessa Ward sign this deed? Carla's mouth trembled, and her eyes darted again to my parents. My mother shook her head slightly, tiny, desperate. My father didn't move at all. Carla exhaled a shaky breath, and when she spoke the lie finally collapsed under its own weight. No, she whispered. I didn't. The courtroom didn't explode, it just reset. Like truth had flipped a switch and everything in the room was now on a different circuit. Judge Halpern's voice turned cold and precise. Thank you, she said. That is all. My mother made a small sound, half gasp, half anger, then snapped her mouth shut as if she'd remembered cameras existed. Mr. Pike stood again, voice cracking with urgency. Your Honor, this is beyond the scope. Judge Halpern lifted her hand. Sit down. He sat. Judge Halpern looked at my parents. Mark Ward, she said. Diane Ward. Stand. They stood slowly, and like gravity had changed. Judge Halpern spoke in a tone that didn't need volume. This court is vacating the default judgment, she said. The writ of possession is dissolved. The unlawful detainer is dismissed for lack of proper service and lack of standing. My father's mouth opened. Judge Hutbrin kept going. This court is referring the quitclaim deed to the district attorney for investigation of fraudulent conveyance and conspiracy, and referring the notary to the commissioning authority for potential revocation. My mother's eyes went wide. Your Honor? Judge Hutbrin's gaze cut her off. No. Then the judge looked at me. Ms. Ward, she said, you will obtain a certified copy of today's order and record it with the county recorder. You will also pursue a title correction through the proper civil channel. Based on what I've seen, you should consider an emergency restraining order as well. I will, I said. Judge Hutbrin nodded once and then she delivered the line that made my parents finally look afraid. And if either plaintiff attempts any further action to remove you from that property, contact law enforcement immediately. This court's orders are not suggestions. The hearing ended with paperwork, stamps, and the kind of silence that only comes after people realize the system is no longer on their side. Outside the courtroom, my parents didn't approach me. They couldn't. Mr. Pike avoided my eyes entirely, speaking to them in quick, low sentences like he was trying to get them out of the building before someone decided to detain them. Carla Mendez walked out the other direction, face pale, clutching her purse like it was a life raft. And I went straight downstairs to the clerk's office and asked for certified copies. The stamp came down hard, thunk, again and again, certified, certified, certified. Then I drove directly to the county recorder's office and recorded the judge's order against the parcel record, attaching it to the fraud alert already in place. The clerk who'd hugged me yesterday didn't smile. She just nodded once when she saw the judge's signature, like she'd been waiting for the paperwork to catch up. On my way out, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time it was one line, shorter than the last. Forget it. I screenshotted it anyway. Because people like my parents don't stop because they grow a conscience. They stop because the doors close. Over the next few weeks I watched the consequences unfold without chasing them. Here the recorder's office confirmed the deed was flagged and subject to investigation. The notary's commission went under review. My employer's security office preserved footage of me entering the building that morning and never leaving. The sheriff's civil unit added the stay and dismissal order to their system, so no one could show up at 6 a.m. with papers and pretend it was routine. And my parents, people who'd spent my whole life telling me the family name mattered, couldn't look me in the eye without seeing their own signatures on a lie. They never apologized. They didn't have the emotional equipment for accountability. My mother sent one email that tried to rewrite the whole thing as a misunderstanding. My father didn't send anything at all, but I didn't need apologies. I needed my house. I needed my grandfather's gift to stay where he put it. With me, the person he trusted. One evening I stood in the living room and looked at the sunlight coming through the windows. The same windows my parents tried to steal by walking into court with forged paper. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. The kind of quiet you earn when you stop begging to be treated fairly and start forcing people to deal with facts. A few weeks later, the street felt normal again. No patrol car at the curb. No parents across the road watching like predators. The fraud alert stayed on the property record until the title correction process finished. And every official letter that arrived went into the same folder with the case number on the spine. I replaced the front door lock, installed a small camera by the porch, and then kept certified copies of the judge's order in a safe place. Not because I wanted to live in fear, but because I wanted to live in reality. My parents had proven they'd use institutions as weapons. I learned to use the same institutions as shields. If your parents tried to evict you from a house your grandfather left you, would you confront them first? Or would you do exactly what I did and let the paperwork trap them in their own lie? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories where silence wins because the record is louder than manipulation, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.